Hello, grade 11. This video is to explain the last part of the lesson, which is about the Persian Empire, and revise on the assignment that you're supposed to do. Like, the lesson started with talking about Persia. You need to know the location of Persia, which is today the southwestern Iran. You need to know that back then, during the ancient times, the countries that were in the Persian Empire were Mesopotamia, Syria, Greeks, Egypt, and India. What's the rule? It was a monarchy, King Cyrus. He built a strong Persian army and he started conquering nearby areas, just like the Spartan Empire, which worked by conquering nearby areas. People were happy because it was a fair rule. The king treated the people he conquered fairly and he allowed them to keep their languages, religion, laws. The empire was so vast it stretched 3,000 miles. And to link this large empire, the Persians built the Royal Road. This is very important. The Royal Road was more than 1,500 miles from Persia to Anatolia, and as you remember, Anatolia is what is today now known as Turkey, which was a part of Greece that time. Travelers, when they traveled during this road, they could take food, water, and refresh their horses along the routes. Now, before the Royal Road was built, this area from Persia to Anatolia took 3 months. But after the Royal Road was built, it only took 7 days. Why is it important? Because messengers could travel back and forth easily and they could spread news much faster. Now, the government. Darius I was the first one to divide the empire. Now, he divided the empire into provinces called satrapies. Okay, each satrapy was ruled by a governor called a satrap. Okay, so it's just like Egypt that has cities and each city has a governor. Each province in the empire was called satrapies and it had a satrap or a governor, which means a defender of the kingdom. Now, what were the tasks of a satrap? A satrap collected taxes and he was a judge in any legal disagreement or case. He managed the police or the security of the city-state. He recruited the soldiers for the Persian army. Now, to talk about the Persian army was a full-time paid professional army. They were the best fighters, and these best fighters were known as the Immortals. Their main task was to guard the king, and they were 10, and some books said they reached up to 100,000 soldiers in one of the battles. When one soldier died in these Immortals, another one was right away replaced. Now, the last part about the Persian Empire is the religion. At first, Persians worshipped many gods, and then a religious teacher called Zoroaster came, and he started the new religion known as Zoroastrianism. You don't need to know any details except that Zoroastrianism, it talks about one supreme God that created everything and that there is naturally good and evil in the world. People were free to choose whatever they wanted, and eventually good will always win. You don't need to know any of the other details that are stated in your book. Now to the second part of the lesson, which is the Persian Wars. Okay? Persian Empire had several wars. Now, the first one of them is the Battle of Marathon. King Darius, he sent a fleet. Remember, a fleet is an army of ships, of 600 ships, to Marathon, which is located northeast of Athens. The Persians waited for several days, but the Greeks did not show up. And then the Persians decided to go and sail and that they will go to Athens so they can attack the Greeks. When the Persians went and they started loading their cavalry, the cavalry are the people on the horses. This was the strongest part of the Persian Empire. So, Persians and Greeks, they were waiting to fight at Marathon. The Persians waited, but the Greeks did not show up. So they decided that they will sail and go to the Greeks to fight and attack by sea. So they will go to Athens. While the Persians were busy putting their cavalry on the ships, they were not in position, they were not ready, the Athenians attacked suddenly. They were out of formation, the soldiers were not in place, and the cavalry, which is the strongest unit, was on the ship. So the Persians, of course, suffered a terrible defeat. And after the Athenians won, one of the young Athenian messengers raced 25 miles from Marathon to Athens to spread the news that the Athenians won. As soon as he reached, because he ran 25 miles, which is too much for a human being, he yelled victory, he screamed victory, and then he died. Nowadays, marathons, the races, if you notice, it's a period or a time, a distance of 25 miles, and usually they take more practice than this young messenger who took it right away without any practice. So this is where we get the name marathon from. Okay, from the young messenger who raced during the Battle of Marathon. Now, the second battle, which is your task, the Battle of Thermopylae. Now, Persians were defeated at Marathon. They wanted revenge. The Persian king, Xerxes, he invaded Greece. He had a vast army of 200,000 troops and thousands of supplies and warships. On the other hand, on the Greek side, it was King Leonidas of Sparta. He decided to supply the soldiers because Spartan soldiers were known to be the toughest. King Themistocles of Athens, he decided to direct the naval forces, the ships, and to make the battle plan. Okay, now they took 7,000 soldiers, and the battle lasted for 3 days at Thermopylae. One of the traitors from Athens showed the Persians a way to go around the Athenians and to attack them from the back. When the Greeks noticed that they're going to lose, Leonidas, he dismissed most of the troops and he only stayed with the best, toughest 300 Spartan soldiers. And they fought to death. No one survived from the Athenians and Spartans. Okay, this was called the Battle of Thermopylae. And during this time, Themistocles, remember he was the one who's supposed to direct the naval forces and to make a battle plan. While Leonidas with the 300 Spartans fought with the Persians, Themistocles took or lured Persia's ships into the Strait of Salamis. As you all know, a strait is a narrow body of water between two pieces of land. So Themistocles started showing the Persians to the strait. Now, Persian ships are big in size because they're very developed and they are wide. A strait is a narrow body of water. Greek ships are small. Now, even though the Persian ships were more in number, but they were bigger, so they had difficulty to move inside the strait. Most of the Persian fleet was destroyed because they could not move inside the strait. When the Persian fleet was destroyed, what remained from the Persian army and fleet fought a battle on land with the Greeks. They had an even number of soldiers, 100,000 on each side. And this time, the Greeks won. So, in the Battle of Thermopylae, it was divided into two parts. One part involved the loss and the death of the 300 Spartans along with Leonidas, because the traitor showed the Persians the way. The second part, which is the continuation of the battle, which involved the fleets, where Persia lost and the Greeks won. So the final victory was for the Greeks. To end the wars, peace happened between the Greeks and Persians in 449. Now, the best way to do this is to take notes as I'm explaining or to reread the Word document and divide it down into a timeline. Make a timeline for the Battle of Marathon and a timeline for the Battle of Thermopylae. So you can have specific events on the timeline. Now, the Persian Empire declined as any empire because they faced many challenges. These are the challenges or the reasons of the decline of the Persian Empire. 1. The army was no longer strong. This is strong, not string. Strong because they fought too much and that's it, they're exhausted. So they could not defend the whole empire. Number 2. Persians, the citizens, were unhappy with the government. Why? Because, just like the French Revolution, the king started taxing people. He fought many wars, he wanted to raise money, so to compensate for the losses of the war, he started taxing the people. This is not fair, so the citizens were unhappy. Then the members of the royal family started to disagree about who to rule and who to not, which weakened the royal family and weakened the rulers. Persia grew weak, and it was open to attacks. Later on, you will know that the first one to attack the Persian Empire was a young and powerful ruler called Alexander the Great. This is the end of the lesson, which is the Persian Empire. Now, write your own notes, make your own timelines, and if you have any questions, let me know.